Good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Armstrong, and on behalf of our research team, I'd like to talk to you all today about some ongoing research examining the production of ancient Italian bronze military equipment. And indeed, for those of you who aren't completely up to date or comfortable with your archaic Italian deities, that's what Sethlans refers to in the title. Sethlans is the Etruscan rough equivalent for the Greek Hephaestus, or the Roman god Vulcan, the god of metalworking. All of our available ancient evidence suggests that military equipment was important to the cultures of the ancient Mediterranean basin, and particularly Italy, during the first millennium BCE. Military equipment was not only used in what was often annual warfare, but was proudly displayed in homes, outside of homes, in public places, depicted in art, dedicated in mortuary and ritual contexts. It's just everywhere. And across the ancient Mediterranean, military equipment was both a functional and forceful symbol of power, as well as an important indication of social and political status. Ancient citizens, particularly in Rome and ancient Athens, were in many ways defined by the type of military equipment they used. So I've listed up here on the slide for you a short list of just some of the many ways in which scholars have acknowledged the importance of this class of objects and how it can help shape our understanding of the ancient world. However, despite this, we know almost nothing about how these items were made, traded, or controlled. And even the basic use of these items is not fully understood. So the project which we're involved in has aimed to address this, particularly focusing on the production of military equipment, although it's hoped that we can explore its later use at a later date. It's funded by the Royal Society of New Zealand Marsden Fund. It's an interdisciplinary project entitled Blood and Money, the Military Industrial Complex of Archaic Italy. And it aims to combine expertise in anthropology and archaeology, as well as classical studies in ancient history, and has begun to explore the productive systems and processes behind ancient military equipment in an Italian context. And it's going to do this in a number of different ways. We have been doing this in a number of different ways, which again, I've listed for you on the slide. First is an exploration of the ancient literature written by Greek and Roman authors. We're also exploring the art and iconography relating to bronze production, again, particularly relating to military equipment, things like the Berlin Foundry Cup there on the slide. And also, what I'll be focusing on today, a proper examination of military equipment finds themselves. This is something which has been done for centuries. We've known about these bits of military equipment for a very long time, but generally it's been explored from a stylistic perspective. There has been relatively limited work done from a technical point of view. There's a range of reasons for this, including the fact that the vast majority of the military equipment finds from the ancient Mediterranean probably reside in private collections, and so generally beyond the reach of academic research. And for the most part, we access them just through kind of grainy photographs from auction catalogs. However, it should be noted that the location of many of the other items in museum collections makes them only slightly more accessible. And again, still, for the most part, they're only accessed visually, often through a glass or kind of perspex divide. So when we got access to the items, we analyzed them in four different ways: macro photography, or traditional photography, PXRF, 3D laser scanning, and photogrammetry. And the goal was to gain as comprehensive an understanding of the nature of these items as possible, both on their own and relative to other bronze finds from the same context, all within the shortest amount of time possible. And that time limit was quite important, as our access to these items was very limited. All of the items analyzed were held in external collections in some way, most of which were located in Europe. And as a result, we were typically only able to study the items for a few days each on location, which of course limited what we could do. As far as a quick summary of the items that we were able to analyze, some of them were located here in New Zealand as part of the Doug Gold private collection. One main set of items, a set of equipment identified as a Samnite set of armor, at least is the label that was given to it, was housed in the Thiess Museum. down in Christchurch, although we were able to get access to a belt, 2 helmets, and a set of armor identified as Etruscan here in Auckland on a short-term loan. These were the only items we were actually able to work on at the University of Auckland. And these were all tricky items to analyze in a number of ways. As the items were from a private collection, none of them had a secure provenance, and of course there are ethical issues involved in using private items in academic work, issues which we had to go through quite carefully. These were the cleanest items, which made the PXRF much easier. That's a process which, as I'm sure all of you know, is tricky on ancient bronze, even in the best of circumstances, let alone if there's any patination on them. But it also featured, all these pieces featured quite a bit of largely undocumented modern reconstruction and repair, which made them, again, difficult to work with. The majority of the pieces we looked at, though, were from collections in Italy, and particularly the National Etruscan Museum, the Museum of the Villa Giulia in Rome. These were items which were largely excavated from closed contexts and documented excavations from across Etruria, from Bay, which is, of course, just north of Rome, up to Gualdo Tadino, which is up in modern Perugia. Although most of these excavations occurred roughly a century ago, and so were not all of them were published, and what was published is not necessarily up to the standard one would like in a modern investigation. Additionally, while most of the pieces had been on display for decades, at least, they had rarely been analyzed in any real detail since their initial excavation and restoration. So, for instance, when examining a 4th century helmet from tomb 15 from Bolci, we uncovered a previously unknown and rather large, actually, inscription on the inside of the neck guard of the helmet, which had been partly covered by modern restoration and completely forgotten about, it seems. So here on the slide, again, I've listed off the main items that we looked at from that particular collection, just to give you a sense of what we were analyzing. We also looked at a number of pieces from the National Archaeological Museum in Paestum, down in Campania, south of Salerno. Very important site, which was a Greek colony, saw lots of connectivity with the Lucanian tribes, and was ultimately captured by Rome. The items there were from a series of closed tomb contexts excavated in the middle of the 20th century, so very good in that respect. Although, as you can tell from the images there, many of them were heavily corroded, which made our lives difficult in other ways. And we were able to get pretty good data from our analysis. We were able to create 2 separate models, one using photogrammetry and one using laser scanning. Here you can see them on the slide alongside the photo of the original there. The laser scan models generally represent the entire 3D volume of each item, although this was not always possible. Sometimes we were not able to get this scanner inside inside just given the nature of the equipment. The models were decimated partially to around 5 to 10 million faces. The majority of the photogrammetry models represent only the exterior of the object, as the interior could not be captured. And the 2 models were then combined to create a visualization of each object, which represents the most accurate surface data with texturing, which you can see here on the right. So you can see the laser scan data, the photogrammetry, and then we were able to combine them together to create a composite model, which is what we have been using to study these items since. In terms of using these various techniques, each one kind of proved useful in different ways. In terms of general accessibility, the photogrammetry models seem to offer the most well-rounded options, the best balance between kind of detail and file size, while also offering the best representation of the object as it presently exists in a collection. In terms of detail, though, laser scanning was able to pick out a fair amount of detail comparable to what was achievable with targeted macro photography. Although this generally did require identifying and exporting a localized segment of the overall scan data. So you can see that here on the right. This is an image of some hammer marks on the inside of a helmet. this is the resolution possible with kind of the full laser scan data, and this is the localized export where you can see it a bit more clearly. On the right, you can see the detail achieved with the standard photography, photogrammetry, and localized laser scan data. So the models proved very useful in terms of, so the techniques, I mean, proved very useful in getting models and information of different types to study and use later, which was the ultimate purpose of the initial analysis. Additionally, the photogrammetry models in particular allowed visual examination of the items and proved a useful platform for mapping PXRF assays. As you can see here, this is all the number of PXRF measurements we did, and the photogrammetry model allowed a really nice platform to show that and can highlight exactly where we were taking those measurements. Beyond just surface detail as well, the laser scan data and models were also able to give some indication of thickness, producing results comparable to those achievable previously with X-rays. So here you can see an example of a 4th century Montefertino helmet and a Negao helmet here, showing the relative thicknesses, which has been very useful to us in figuring out how these items were actually made. The laser scan data was also very useful for highlighting areas of repair. Here is a relatively obvious one. As you can see here on the left, you can spot the repair quite clearly here visually, and it shows up in the difference in texture very clearly in the laser scan data as well. However, it is also something which shows up quite clearly in with much smaller repairs as well. The laser scan data is able to pick up the change in texture where the restorers actually were obviously attempting to fool the eye into thinking that there was no repair at all. That's exactly the same as everything else around it. So very useful there. Additionally, the 3D models have allowed us to digitally reconstruct the items. Seen here with a Sam attic helmet, you can see down here how it was preserved. You can see only 2 of the 3 attachments for feathers were actually preserved. However, there is very clearly a solder mark there where the 3rd one would have gone. We were able to virtually reconstruct this item using these models, which was quite useful. And again, this is a relatively simple one, but it shows what's possible with these sorts of techniques. Additionally, the 3D models have proven very useful for a final part of the project, which is an experimental archaeology where we are attempting to reconstruct these items. The 3D models have proven very useful visual exemplars, and of course we can 3D print them as well, which provides the craftsmen, particularly those Nick Harrison at Redoubt Forge down in Hamilton, New Zealand, to give him a very clear model of what he is trying to produce. So very useful in that respect. And of course, as he's been producing these items, we can then also scan and create photogrammetry models to do a direct quantitative comparison between what we've been able to produce and what the ancients were able to produce. So in conclusion, the 3D models of artifacts that we've been able to create can significantly increase the amount of usable data available from ancient military equipment finds. They're useful for the broad stylistic analysis, so that kind of traditional analysis, although they arguably allow more detail than that typically possible in a museum. The ability to digitally manipulate these items is quite important and also opens the door for new, more quantitative analyses. They also obviously allow access worldwide, providing a stable set of data which can allow replicable studies from many different scholars, and permanently move items into the public sphere, which is particularly important for items from private collections. Again, although a very thorny set of ethical issues there. But it's a particularly important one when dealing with ancient military equipment, where certainly over half, and probably much more than that, currently sit in private collections. And so just a huge data set we know which exists, but which we don't have access to. So unfortunately, that's all the time I have I have today, but thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering any questions which you might have.